I have to say, coming in over Fintown this evening and looking at that western setting sun, it gave me the urge to be striding across the blue stacks. This is truly a beautiful county, and hopefully when I'm finished with the next government, which I intend to lead, Donegal's tourism will prosper and go from strength to strength. Very glad to be here in the company of Minister Ryan and under the chairmanship of Sean Whelan, and to hear Gabriel and Sean give two very fine addresses here from a business perspective. Just to show you that, like, we're not all mortal enemies, when Gabriel did speak about the information deficit disorder, Minister Ryan turned to me and he said, actually, there's another one. It's funny how the products come very quickly. It's called EDD, and it's called electoral deficit disorder. And it's actually something that's going to become very prevalent in the times ahead, I think. Joe Mulholland, I'd like to congratulate you again on your wonderful McGill School. Some of the stuff I hear coming from here, I'd prefer if I didn't hear it actually, but in any event, you are to be congratulated on another fine opportunity for discourse and conversation here in Atlantis. Now, the government tells us that the recession is at an end, and perhaps technically it is. However, there is clearly a huge difference between the Ireland that is going to be ground out by the relentless forces of credit starvation, of long-term unemployment and of emigration, and the Ireland that could emerge if we adopt more decisive, more creative and more innovative solutions that can harness our entire community and what they have to offer and how we deal with this task. The last recession officially ended in 1983, yet it was 6 years after that before investment and job creation significantly reduced the dole queues. 6 years. The government's strategy at the moment has two planks to it, just two. The first is writing whatever cheques are necessary. They bail out delinquent banks. Write whatever cheques are necessary. The second is to cut the budget deficit each year through what I consider are savage and insensitive cuts. These two planks add up to a policy of national retrenchment. Nothing positive, nothing ambitious, nothing creative to restore confidence in this country's economic future, in which I believe. The party that I lead, the Fine Gael party, does offer a profoundly different alternative. And this party says to the next generation, your potential can and will flourish here in Ireland, if that's what you want to do. Because Fine Gael look at this crisis, at this unprecedented scale of crisis, and says we have to look at this as an opportunity for the political and the economic transformation of our country. Last year at the McGill School, I argued vehemently that we needed radical reform of our political system to make it responsive, efficient, accountable and transparent. Others have followed in our wake with a variety of other proposals. In March of this year, my party produced a serious document on new politics which amounts to the most radical agenda for political reform in this country since the 1930s. I am confident that when in government we give the people the opportunity and implement these changes, that they will achieve and get the overwhelming endorsement of the Irish people when they have to decide on it. I want to argue a bit this evening about how we should radically reform our whole approach to the economy and create what I call the enterprise society. Much of it has been referred to here by Sean and indeed by Gabriel. So instead of the bubble economy that we've had from Fianna Fáil, where financial and property speculation was rewarded, what we need to create is an economy that rewards individuals who take real risks, who create real jobs and wealth that the country so desperately needs. I don't mean the kind of risk takers who, if it goes right for them, get all the loot, and if it goes wrong for them, that the taxpayer takes the hit. That's not responsible risk-taking, and that's not the kind of risk-taking that I would like to see rewarded. Previous waves of Irish industrial innovation and expansion in this country were stimulated by an economic crisis, and through that, a visionary response to what the state actually needed to do. Examples: the establishment of the ESB in 1927. Example, the Shannon Scheme in Ardna Crusher, 1929. The dramatic electrification of rural Ireland from 1955, and indeed, let it be said, under former Minister Albert Reynolds, when he was in Communications and Posts and Telegraphs, the digitalisation of our telecoms exchanges in the late 80s, late 70s and right through the 80s. And the air transport liberalisation in the mid-80s that launched Ryanair as Europe's largest airline. And that, of course, came about because former Commissioner Sutherland smashed the cartels that were there and brought about a liberalisation of that regime with benefits for millions of people in the intervening period. So now it's a time, actually, to look at how we want to reimagine or imagine what our economic future can be like. Fine Gael Party published a serious document about an economic recovery authority, a jobs plan, if you like, where we look at the creation of new means of delivering new infrastructure projects that will provide the platform for the next phase of this country's growth and tackle the core competitiveness challenges that face our economy, that have been referred to here by Sean. In green energy production, broadband networks and water storage and transmission, the new Economic Recovery Authority will deliver a 21st century infrastructure for a 21st century country. And unlike investments that have been financed by the taxpayer on the sort of companies of old, the new Economic Recovery Authority will not put any extra demands on the traditional government expenditure, but there will be financial investments with a commercial rate of return. So the borrowings that those commercial state bodies make will not be added on to the national debt, now standing at over 130 billion. So funding these investments will require us to transform how we do business in this state. They have to be managed commercially so that they yield a proper return. We will also sell assets of the past at the appropriate time when we consider that they're not of any value to us anymore. It doesn't make any sense for the state to own and to finance 3 or 4 differing, competing energy companies, or to operate 5 or 6 different telecom networks when our water, our energy and our broadband networks are crying out for investment. Only today, the National Competitiveness Council points out that we have the 3rd most expensive rate of broadband of the 28 OECD countries. When I go into my local school and I say to them, "What is your broadband speed here?" and they say 0.5 megabyte, a drip of water from a tap. And we expected that these children would be able to compete with their peers in Japan or America or New Zealand or anywhere else. We are so far behind that if I say to Eamon Ryan as Minister and his colleague and somebody I know well, you have to drive these things politically because it won't happen the way it's going on. We have a lot of suds and no substance. I see many of the metropolitan area networks around the country where the ducts are in, there are no cables, they're not connected, it doesn't work. And yet it's cost millions from a taxpayer's perspective. We've just got to sort this out, and it can only be sorted out by real political leadership. I've asked our own economic team, which is a really strong group, to go beyond the economic plans that we spoke about in the past, and to set out what I consider are key elements of an enterprise society to end the debt and the unemployment that this Fianna Fáil-led government has generated. My God Almighty, I come, as you know, from an area of the country not dissimilar to Donegal, which has been ravaged by emigration for a century and a half, and irrespective of what they say, or how smart the economy is, or how sophisticated the digital connections are, it is very sad to see young people have to leave their families, have to leave their homes, when we should be in a position to say to them, if you want a career and an opportunity and a job in this country, you can have it. If you choose to go, we'll send you out competent and qualified and well able to stand the heat and the competition from any other peers around the world. I want to see a leaner, a more skilled, a more competitive and a more competitive banking and financial sector that will serve the needs and is responsive to the needs of people and of business, not the other way around. And if that means more and smaller banks, then so be it. I also want to see a rebalancing of our tax system. It will offer greater support to innovation, to enterprise and to employment. There are tax loopholes still there in the property sector. There are other issues that have been recommended by the Commission on Taxation that could be applied and that the resultant savings could be pumped into the cutting of taxes and jobs. Because you're in an area here in Donegal, unemployment's been rising. You don't have any major conurbation. And you're not going to have international people coming in here by the thousand to say we want to create jobs for you. That day is done. And what we have to do is rely on our indigenous resources, on our small business capacity, and on creativity in the way we provide initiative and incentive and reward for small business and for hard work. I've asked our own Deputy John Perry down in Sligo to bring me forward a green paper on small business before Christmas, which will build on the platform that we've already set out there about incentives such as, indeed, the government have adopted in a number of cases with PRSI holidays and so on. But in my view, it is grossly unfair in this country that a 51% marginal tax rate should apply on the average industrial wage over €36,000. At 51% of every cent earned above that is taken away in levies, taxes, income cuts or whatever. That's not fair, and people realise that there's a different way of actually doing this. This is not the way you can promote extra effort. It is not the way you promote enterprise, and it is not the way that you promote risk-taking. I want to see a new culture of innovation in enterprise, where entrepreneurs, I used to be able to pronounce that word one time, and engineers, that they shape Irish companies, not accountants. Look at what's happening in other countries. Talk to this man. Because accountants do not invent new products. Figures do not create new products. Engineers do. Thinkers do. People who are at the coalface know how products should evolve. And we should be, in our education system, so much more focused on giving young people the opportunity to involve themselves in how businesses are run, how businesses are created, how products are made and sold, so that their young minds, innovative and creative, can flourish and respond. I want to see a culture of responsible risk-taking by overhauling our bankruptcy laws. These are Victorian. Why is it that we have this culture of failure? John opens a shop, he opens a little factory, it goes bust after 2 years, and he's deemed to be a failure. The next time he comes back in another country, he comes back stronger, leaner, more learned, and he goes at it again. Bankruptcy laws in Ireland are Victorian. You're out for 12 years. But if you're a really innovative, working person, there's no reason why we shouldn't reshape that and change that culture. Because people can have businesses that fail for no reason other than, issues completely outside their control, and we shouldn't be treating them as pariahs just because a business fails after they have the initiative and the courage and the guts to set it up in the first place. I want to open up the protected sectors of our economy. We had the National Competitiveness Council today saying that since this recession started, there have been increases in the costs of legal fees. Why is it that all these things have been closed for so long and that governments of all types have failed to break it open? Why is that? Why have we these locked away situations? That's got to be broken for the new Ireland and the new enterprise society of which I speak. And I want an education system that's in the top 5 of the OECD countries for mathematics. This is a bugbear of mine, a real bugbear. Because if we expect the primary school children in Glenties and Donegal to carry the burden and the responsibility of leveraging this country forward in the next 25 years, we've got to give them the opportunity and the platform to be able to meet that. Why is it that brilliance in education is not recognised? Why is it that brilliance in teaching is not recognised? I know the many fine teachers there are around the country and the job they do and the pressure they're under. But brilliance is something else. And it's not just about the subject. It is in the teaching of the subject, how you teach. And for me, investment in the training of how to teach is so important for the young minds that stand in the classrooms of today. It's not just about knowing the subject. It is knowing how to teach it. And you know yourselves, many people drift into this by accident in many ways. Young people go to college, they do their degree, they do their HDIP, they get chosen by lottery. Some of them might never have intended to be teachers, but they get the HDIP. And the training that they get to actually teach on the journey of information gathering, the adventure of what it is to learn and to be able to learn, to study and find new ways, new avenues. We need to invest in there, because these young people are going to have to carry this country on their backs, and the burden that they've been left with is absolutely crushing. And if we don't get our politics right to be different, efficient, transparent, accountable and working in the country's interest, then we leave them with a future which they will find it very difficult to actually deal with. I believe deep down inside myself, we've got that political will and that competence to do this. It's about sound political judgment. You can have all the economists that you like. Governments can hire them by the thousand, and they've had thousands, and look where we are. But it is about making sound political judgments in the country's interests when people are given a range of options. We're going to need both, because the choices are limited, thanks to the clientelism, the denial, and the downright economic incompetence of what's happened here. 2 independent banking reports say quite clearly that 75% of this mess is our own doing. 75% of it. We should be a backwater of this international recession. But instead of that, we're here desperate spinning about green shoots and technicalities about recessions being over. Go into the retail shops. Go around the country and meet the business people. And they'll tell you that they're hanging on by their nails. Hanging on by their nails. And there's so much that we could do to reduce these dole queues of over 455,000. Fiscal austerity is not a choice anymore, it's an imperative. A $3 billion cut in the borrowing requirement in 2011 is not a choice, that's an imperative too. And here's the reality. Raising taxes and cutting capital investment programmes leads to longer and to deeper recessions. I share your view. Every billion you take off the capital programme is another 16,000 jobs gone, and it means that much needed infrastructure is delayed again. Yeah, that's the international experience. If you keep raising taxes and cutting capital investment, you prolong the recession in any country. Those that trim their day-to-day spending and overhaul their public services and the way that they're delivered actually do so much better, because countries can never, ever tax their way back to recovery, and Ireland can't do it either. 53%, 55% of the deficit-cutting measures that have been taken by Brian Lenihan have been tax increases or cuts in public investment, more than half. And that's the wrong formula for economic recovery. And despite its protestations yesterday from Farmley, I believe that the government are going to end up again in less than 19 weeks going down the same cul-de-sac again, because the preparatory work has not been done. We've had lectures from the Department of Finance about flat-rate water charges. Yet there's talk of the metering and all the rest of it. Which has it got to be? We have all of these people ready and willing to work. Our party's taken a view on this. We say, yes, introduce water charges only after you put in the meters and after you give people an allowance that's free. And if they want to leave the tap running after that, they're going to have to make a contribution to it. And if the government refuse to make the tough decisions now that are going to generate real savings, you're not going to be able to do things the way you want unless you broaden the tax base. It looks like we're heading down that same business again of capital spending being cut and hikes on income. And that's going to damage and destroy confidence for 2011 as well. Now, the right formula to tackle this is to restructure our public sector so that it delivers more and better services even though budgets are tighter. Other countries have shown the way that this can be done. I actually believe myself, a very simple philosophy, every public servant, and there are many, many brilliant public servants, should be able to go home in the evening, happy in the knowledge that they've contributed to the welfare and the good of their country, that they've done a good job in a system that allows initiative to be rewarded, that allows enterprise to flourish, and not have it in a situation where it strangles both of those. Sweden and Canada are 2 examples where they cut current spending in the 1990s an 11% cut in the former and a 20% cut in the latter. And service quality wasn't compromised, and their economies both prospered in the aftermath. If they can do it as a model there, so can Ireland. They did a complete rethink of the way services are delivered by the state, and the Fine Gael party are going to produce their own paper on this in the autumn. It's not going to be easy. There are no magic wands here. One thing we've learned from the last 13 years of this government is that the easy option politics always lead to harder choices later. Easy option politics, from Fianna Fáil perspective, meant reckless domestic mismanagement of our banks and public services. That is the inescapable conclusion that anybody reading the two preliminary reports on the banking crisis will have to come to. And when you have to make the tough decisions then, if it's the soft touch that's taken every time, it's always with a degree of unfairness. How is it, said the woman who sat across from my desk a month ago, whose daughter is blind from birth? She said they're now training her to use the white cane. The little girl has got difficulties intellectually and from a mobility perspective. She said, remember the old Johnny Cash song, Mr Congressman, why don't you understand? And her point was this: her special needs assistant, the hours were being cut for her child, who is her focus, the entire focus of her entire life. And she said, don't they understand the gulf of unfairness in our country when I see people walking out the gate with €1 million in their back pocket endorsed by government for incompetence? That's where the unfairness and the anger is in our society today. And that's replicated in thousands and thousands of cases that you'll find behind closed doors this evening. The easy option politics, from Fianna Fáil perspective, meant a blanket guarantee to the banks. Professor Honohan says it was a mistake to extend the guarantee to existing long-term debts and risk capital in the banks. Not only was it a mistake, it was an unnecessary mistake, because it narrowed the options available to government when the true scale of the insolvency of some of the covered institutions actually became clear. His criticisms of the blanket guarantee were compounded last week by the release of some documentation by the Public Accounts Committee. And contrary to government assertions, those documents show no official and no external expert pushed the government to introduce a blanket guarantee on nearly all the liabilities of virtually the entire banking system. There was no such documentation that said this is what you must do. On the contrary, the government's decision to give a blanket guarantee to Anglo-Irish Bank and to Irish Nationwide ignored clear warnings from people whom you paid $7 million for their advice, Merrill Lynch and a senior civil servant. The Secretary General of the Department at the time, Mr Doyle, and professional advisers, Merrill Lynch, directly warned both the Taoiseach and the Minister for Finance that losses in Anglo-Irish and Irish Nationwide could well exceed their capital, so that a blanket guarantee could expose you, the taxpayer, to serious losses. Merrill Lynch specifically recommended against the blanket guarantee on the basis that it would damage Ireland's credit rating, downgraded again just the other day. And the point is, if there was doubt, and clearly there was doubt, about the solvency issue, then these papers should have been published in the national interest. It is about everybody in the country. Yet throughout October 2008, throughout that Oireachtas debate on the guarantee, and up until this very day, the government has presented the decision as driven by official advice, unanimous official advice. Well, for me, the bottom line, regretfully, is that neither the Taoiseach nor the Minister for Finance have been fully forward with the truth in this matter. The full truth is that they were offered a wide range of advice about Anglo-Irish Bank and about Irish Nationwide. They ignored that good advice, and they made a catastrophic decision, given fancy footwork that they went about. And I want to say this: when Brian Lenihan rang me at 7 o'clock in the morning, on the morning of the crisis in the banks, he said, "Deputy, there's a real problem with the Irish banks. We may have to guarantee them. What would Fine Gael's view be?" And I said, "Minister, Brian, you can take it that the Fine Gael party understand the fundamental importance of having a working banking system that keeps credit flowing, that keeps business moving, and that's so important for our people. And we support a guarantee from that perspective. But obviously there are conditions to be attached to this. We were never told, we were never informed that there was a solvency doubt clearly on the record in the department about this matter. And I am confident myself, actually, that if the full truth had been made known, if the issues of doubt about solvency were clear, then the Oireachtas would not have given a blanket guarantee, but would have given a guarantee, but at the same time that would have been limited. It would have stopped the banks from failing, but would have kept open the option of forcing other providers of long-term risk capital and debt to those institutions to take a much greater share in what they'd been involved with. We've argued this in the Dáil on numerous occasions. I believe very strongly that those who were clinking the champagne glasses at what happened here should have been made at least pay part of that price. And the decision by the Minister for Finance and by the Taoiseach to insist on a blanket guarantee was based on reasons that are unclear to this very day. And unless the banking inquiry is allowed to determine the true facts behind this decision, it will be seen as a whitewash. And that inquiry has got to include an investigation into the trading in senior and subordinated bonds in the Irish banks before and after the guarantee. Billions of euro were made by financial speculators because of the government guarantee on these instruments. We must find out, and we have to find out, who these people were. And I want to know, despite the fact that there's no paperwork in there from Allied Irish Bank or from the Bank of Ireland, were there other financial institutions speaking directly to the government or obliquely to the government? This is a fundamental issue. If you're in a position to buy €1 billion worth of bonds that amount to junk status for 50 or 100 million, and that as soon as a guarantee in blanket form is announced that these things make phenomenal profits, people have a right to know whether there was contact directly or indirectly, obliquely or otherwise, with government in relation to that matter. Brian Lenihan's mantra that throwing 25 billion of Irish taxpayers' money at two dead banks was necessary to maintain Ireland's sovereign creditworthiness has not been borne out by these events. On the contrary, as Merrill Lynch predicted before the guarantee was given, it had the opposite effect. The government's write whatever checks are necessary policy undermined confidence in our public finances and in our capacity to honour our foreign debts. And that's why the cost of Irish government borrowing remains at such a high level. That's why the ESRI are now saying we may need even greater spending cuts than was previously thought, and you, the taxpayer, are going to have to pay. When you consider how 25 billion borrowed over the next 5 to 10 years could have been invested to boost this country's confidence, pouring it down the drain of two dead banks is one that you would never choose. Now, the fact that Brian Lenihan, who's a good acquaintance of mine, is fighting a personal battle with dignity and with courage must not distract us from that painful reality. And that painful reality is that this government made a political decision, for reasons that are yet unclear, that pouring that money down the drain of the bank actually amounts to more than this country has drawn down in structural and cohesion and other funds since 1973 when we joined the European Union. Somebody rang me the other day. He said, you know, I saw the tradesmen becoming developers. He was sitting on a ditch down in the Gaeltacht, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean. And he said, the day I saw the state beginning to give all of these concessions to people who suddenly had jumped up to that status, I knew there was something wrong. When he said, in fact, they should have been helping the man down there who was lifting his lobster pots, because he said what he was providing was being sold on the French market and generating income for our country. And the point made to me by somebody yesterday who said, I'm very enthused by Máire Geoghegan-Quinn, the Commissioner on Innovation in Europe, on the announcement of a 6 billion multi fund for innovation and development, which is very good. He said she expects that this fund will create 150,000 jobs throughout Europe. 150,000 jobs. Yet we have thrown the equivalent of 5 times that amount down the toilet, and not one job will come out of that. 25 billion. The children's futures are mortgaged to that, as was evidenced by John Fitzgerald's comments yesterday. That's the reality. That's the tragedy. That's the straitjacket that I am more than likely going to be faced with, either before Christmas or 2011, because it's on its way and the electorate have made their decision to get rid of this government. It's not going to be a situation where it falls into anybody else's lap without earning it. You've got to demonstrate worthiness, credibility, soundness of political decision, and a plan and a path that clearly will lead to the enterprise society that I'm talking about. And that difference is one of focus. My focus is not on saving banks that are dead and standing idly by, to use that famous phrase, while the brightest and the best leave our shores and give of their talents and their futures to other countries and other electorates. I want them here. If they want to stay here, our country should be able to respond. As a former Minister for Trade myself, I know that our island mentality, our instinct, has always meant that Irish people can measure up to whatever the competition is, whatever it is. And there are hundreds of thousands of our people all over this country every day who want to help, because Paddy at least understands one thing. Explain the problem to him. And if you say, this is how we're going to sort it out, he'll say, I'll put my shoulder to that wheel, provided you do it fairly and that you do it honestly. And what's happened in so many instances is that government has turned its back on people who want to do that. It should about turn its face of encouragement and assistance and help and motivation to people who love our country and who want to move us out of this horrific economic swamp into which we've been led. My focus is on the national potential of our country. It is on the fighting spirit of a nation that will never accept defeat and that has never accepted defeat. On the hopes and the dreams and the energies and the talents that are out there in every town and village and city across this country. On the hope and the hunger for creativity and direction. On the need to move beyond blame. Because we all know we should not be here. It's to say, this is the path forward. This is the way forward. Here is the direction to the opposite shore and what it can bring for our children and for our country's future. And it's to move beyond the hope, to confidence and security. Because Irish people really don't want all that much. When you say to them, what do you really need? I'd like to think that I can look after my family, as the case might be. That I'm going to have a roof over my head. That I'm going to have opportunities for my children. I don't really want all that much. Just give me that sense of security, that if I live, I'm going to be able to manage. I'm not looking for millions. I want to know that there's a sense of security and confidence in what I've got to do. And I agree entirely with Sean and Gabriel. Politics, good politics, different politics, can change this culture and can lead us to an excitement in a period of depression that can really change our country for the future. I believe that the electorate will vote whenever, before 2012 obviously. It's on its way. And they're going to make a big change. And for me, my work is focused on the provision of transitioning ourselves from being able to explain to people what it is that we're going to do to attract their votes and their support, so that when the new government is formed, that it's going to be able to say, this is what we said we would do, and this is what we will do, in everybody's interest, because we have no attachments to anybody other than the Irish people. And my job as leader of the party is not to be distracted from that objective and from that target. I see, in fact, from a politician's perspective, one of the most exciting periods in Ireland in many years up ahead. It's going to be challenging, it's not going to be easy, but the Irish people are looking for leadership that's straight, that's honest, that's fair, that will not dance around the issue, that will say, we will help us all together to get this problem sorted out. I know that by 2016, when we celebrate that centenary, we can and will be in a position that our country is on the rise again, and bring us to a point where my vision of the enterprise society will create happiness, confidence, security. And it will be there because government has changed the way we do business in our country to allow business to be done by those who want to do it. And they're out there in their hundreds of thousands, and I look forward to leading that charge. Thank you very much.